Get ready because the shipping industry is ripe for disruption. You're listening to Autonomous Ships Headquarters Podcast with your host, JP.
Hello everybody and welcome to the show. Today I'm going to be talking with Mr. Nick Lambert. I've met Nick on a conference in Rotterdam, and he's definitely one of the most knowledgeable persons in the maritime industry that I have the opportunity to talk to. That's not a surprise since he has almost 40 years of experience in the industry. He served in the British Royal Navy as nothing less than the Rear Admiral. He's a master mariner, and he concluded his long naval operational career as the UK National Hydrographer. He's the founder and director of Nick Lambert Associates International. It is an UK-based company specialized in consulting startups, corporations, NGOs, and governments on applying modern technologies in the maritime arena. As a strategic thinker and with remarkable experience under his belt, he will share with us some of his thoughts about the future of the maritime industry. Without further ado, meet Nick Lambert. Hello, Nick. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed. Very pleased to be on the show, Uri.
For the beginning, who is Nick Lambert and how did you end up here where you are?
My background is all marine and maritime. I joined the Navy, which was a long-time aspiration right from when I was very small, in 1977 as an ordinary seaman. I joined it for 3 years and left 36 years and 50 days later, having had an interesting time.
Wow, that's a real impressive career path there, especially in the British Navy. So I see that you served as a Rear Admiral. What does the Rear Admiral do?
I was very lucky. I was promoted and I drove ships and all that sort of thing. And as in the rank of Rear Admiral, I was the UK National Hydrographer based in Taunton. So very heavily involved in the maintenance of the global portfolio of products and services for navigation that are provided by the UK Hydrographic Office.
And what motivated or inspired you to join the maritime industry?
I've been part of the maritime industry, if you'll have to include navies as part of that industry for many, many years, as you can tell. And it was a natural transition from that into the maritime and marine sector when I left, primarily because I was very, very interested in the state of the seas and oceans and what we could do about improving them. I was particularly interested in the need for more data about our seas and oceans, and particularly the bathymetry.
Very interesting. And did you have maybe some mentors along the way, or some remarkable people that had an influence on you along your way?
We have there are numerous mentors and a lot of luck involved in a career like that. I can think back to one or two. Chief Petty Officer Dauncey, who was my Chief Petty Officer when I finally got to Dartmouth. Chief Petty Officer Edgecombe when I was at HMS Raleigh as an ordinary seaman, who knocked me into shape. And a particular chap called Sub-Lieutenant Jan Pearce, who was the one who helped me make the transition to Dartmouth and become an officer.
Yeah, sounds great. And now you have your own company called NLA International. You have a group of partners, as I saw. And could you tell us maybe a little bit more on what is NLA International focused on? What do you guys do? How did you start?
Of course, NLA International is a blue economy solutions company. We do a range of things. We're particularly focused on activities and projects which can improve things in the blue economy, can improve elements of the blue economy sector, but particularly focused on improving the environment and gathering data to improve our knowledge of the environment. We also look for interesting technologies which can be beyond the blue economy that could be used in that sector, and we will provide consultancy services as well. We've got 3 directors and about 10 associates with a range of skill sets.
Great. And who are primarily your clients? Who do you advise usually?
I've got a wide range of clients. We do a lot of work in the space sector in particular because the the space sector, especially the low Earth orbit part of the space sector, are interested in using satellites for maritime situational awareness, and we have a lot of expertise in that. We do some work for a couple of big corporates. We do some work for universities, and we've helping several SMEs across a range of parts of the blue economy, in fishing, in marine protected areas, in maritime situational awareness for national security, and a range of other projects.
And yeah, we started already talking about the blue economy, and I know you're one of the biggest proponents of this concept. Could you maybe explain in some shorter terms what is actually blue economy, and how is this concept related to the shipping industry?
It's a good question. A lot of people ask it, and it's often a concept that they find difficult to understand. The blue economy is everything to do with marine and maritime. If you try to find a standard definition for marine or maritime, please let me know, because I've tried hard and can't find one. The blue economy encompasses the traditional sectors, by which we're talking about shipping, ports and harbours, shipbuilding and maintenance, fishing, and perhaps offshore oil and gas. It brings in new sectors such as seabed mining, marine biopharmaceuticals, tourism, particularly leisure and coastal tourism, and it brings in aquaculture, which is one of the fastest growing sectors in the global economy, and offshore renewables, of course. And once you start to bring all of those sectors together and set them in the context of the marine environment, where those sectors operate and how they interface with the marine environment, you then have this sort of whole ecosystem approach, which is described as the blue economy.
Interesting. And so will be the oceans is a beginning and the end of life on our planet. It all revolves around it. And what do you think are the biggest obstacles in, especially to shipping industry, in supporting the blue economy?
Good question. First of all, we should really be called Planet Ocean, not Planet Earth. So you quite rightly captured that. And the issue is very much around having sufficient data to understand what we've done to our seas and oceans and how important they are to us, and then to assess what we need to do to ensure that they continue to support us. And we're going to have to go into the seas and oceans, and we've already started going into the seas and oceans, to have the protein and the resources needed to support the predicted 2 million additional bodies that are going to be on the 2 billion additional bodies that are going to be on the planet in the next 20 or 30 years. So that's the opportunity, and bringing the blue economy into play enables us to understand that, to gather that data, and to ensure that the economic exploitation of the seas and oceans is done in an economically viable but environmentally sustainable way. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part you asked around how does it affect shipping? Or what stops it? What stops people from adopting the blue economy concept? And this is not just shipping, actually, this is from many different areas. The problem is that the concept is too big, or people fear that the concept is too big, and they want to zoom in on one particular element. That just takes you down the route of just doing fishing or just doing offshore renewables, and the opportunity to gain synergies between the two is lost. So for shipping, the difficulty will be, well, what's aquaculture got to do with me? What's offshore renewable got to do with me? In fact, when you get into a complex sea basin, like the North Sea or the Mediterranean or the Gulf of Mexico or wherever, once you're in those complex sea basins, you are all intermingling with each other. Those industries, sectors all intermingle. And I often tell the story that when I was a midshipman, there was 15% more navigable sea space in the North Sea than there is now. And that's because of the growth of offshore infrastructure. And so we are now all intermingled. All these sectors are working in the same space. This is the opportunity to look for the synergies between those sectors.
Indeed, that is especially important once we start introducing unmanned and then autonomous vessels in the picture, right?
But yes, you're absolutely right. The unmanned platforms clearly have benefits throughout the seas and oceans, right out in the deep oceans. But where there's a lot of opportunity to use them in complex sea basins for monitoring purposes of all kinds, either to support the operations of offshore infrastructure or to gather marine environment data. And clearly, if we're going to operate autonomous systems for data gathering, we're going to have to think about how they interface with manned vessels and infrastructure. And if we're going to operate increasingly unmanned platforms, then we've got to think about how they operate in complex sea basins like the North Sea.
That will be very interesting developments in the future, definitely. And I see that you emphasized several times the maritime data, and it's obvious that it's super important. But my question is, how well do we know actually what is going on in our oceans? How far are we reaching out? Do we actually know what is going on?
That's the $1 million question. I think most of the scientists that I speak to tell me that we know enough to be worried about the state of our seas and oceans. We don't know enough to know how worried to be. And we certainly don't know enough to have all the answers that we need to create a sustainable seas and oceans environment. So the answer is we don't know enough. And there's a lot of work to be done. So I separate, in my mind's eye, I mentioned that need for definitions of marine and maritime earlier. I have two definitions in my mind. One is the marine environment, which is all of the natural resource in the seas and oceans, on the seabed, in the water column, in the airspace above, and where they interface with the land. And maritime operations, which is anything that human beings do at sea. And wherever we are these days, we have the sensors, we have the connectivity, whatever we're doing, be it fishing, be it offshore oil or aquaculture, we could be fitting our systems with sensors, and we could be gathering data which could be provided for our understanding of the marine environment. And that's how I stitch the two together in my mind's eye. And I'm very passionate about it. And shipping, which could do a huge amount to help that. Shipping could be providing that data into the marine environment. And we're getting to the stage now where we can handle big data sets. We can provide suitable portals to access information and so on. And we could all be contributing to the common good of data gathering about the marine environment.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I was wondering what is the current state of these efforts, because we know that technology is there, and we know that we have a lot of data coming from space, from terrestrial systems, and from maritime systems. So my question is, are there any workings on a way to integrate all of this data under the same umbrella, where we can then extract the maximum value out of it?
Very good question again, Uri. I would say that we've got a long way to go. There are pockets of activity where data is being gathered, but it is very, very fragmented. It's certainly not comprehensive.
So there is no, let's say, a project which is aimed at combining all of these data.
There are some projects that are aimed at it. The General Bathymetric Chart of the Ocean is an example where Ships of Opportunities provide soundings into JEBCO, as it's known, and that has an aspiration to map the seas and oceans by 2030. That was recently launched by the International Hydrographic Organization. But that's a very, very big ask. And then there are other projects which bring in Met data and so on. But none of them are comprehensive or global, and arguably none of them are really. Well, JEBCO is global, but they're not comprehensively global. They don't cover everything in great detail, and there is no one global data set that I know of that would cover all aspects of marine environment data gathering, and it's a huge ask if you think about it.
Yes, indeed.
But I think we could do a lot more And I would start in our complex sea basins on the continental shelf as areas where we could share data in a much, much better way. It would also reduce cost.
And then probably in the future extrapolate that to deep sea applications, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Over time, we'll get there. We're certainly, you mentioned satellite technology, and I often say that we are moving from an era of sea blindness, which was covered all of my naval career, where people were very, very concerned that nobody in government really understood what went on at sea, and that's why our Navy was getting smaller. I think we're moving from an era of sea blindness to an era of sea vision, and certainly in complex sea basins, we have the ability now, and in my lifetime, we will be able to see everything that human beings are doing in complex sea basins. Out on the high seas, it's a bit more difficult and probably a little less important. But in the sea basins, we can definitely do it.
And let's say for example, we have this technology that we can integrate all of these data, and that we have very good vision on what is going on the complex sea basins. What do you think would be the biggest value that we can extract from those data sets?
Oh,
I know it's a hard question because
it's not. We're just thinking where to start. It would be cost effectiveness, I think. If you had a really good map of a complex sea basin, you would save so much time and effort going out there and gathering yet more data about it when you wanted to do something in it. So there are numerous agencies that do bathymetric surveys for their next project, and those data sets tend to be data gathered once, used for one purpose, and then parked. Whereas what we should be doing is gathering data once, using it for many purposes, for many different stakeholders, and we don't do that. The other thing is we don't really coordinate very well around complex sea basins. So shipping transiting from one part of a complex sea basin to another part, the coordination between authorities is only starting to improve as we speak. The Balts are very, very good at it. The Baltic Sea is extremely well coordinated, but other parts are not. And this is again where opportunity is there to coordinate activity better, which obviously results in better safety, more operational efficiency, but also means you can pack more activity into a water space. So the benefits of comprehensive data sets that anybody can access are huge. The cost of data is often a blocker to activity. So startup companies find data very, very expensive. So if we were able to make a lot of that data freely available, we would then start to see the benefits of it. The Irish real map of Ireland is an example of that.
So, but besides the cost of data, which is obvious, and it's a kind of a roadblock to startups and other innovative businesses that might come around the block, but besides the costs, maybe also the ownership of data is a big deal, because once we have this huge sets of generated data, everybody wants to claim part of it. And how do you think that can be arranged? Because we have data coming from multiple stakeholders on multiple locations, multiple countries. This should all be based on some open source technology, and but previously agreements needs to be made to share this data, correct?
Yeah, well, that's if you go down a government route, but there are commercial opportunities as well. I think there is a growing awareness in society of the value of data sets, and people are beginning to realize that in their companies or in their agencies, they are sitting on high-value data sets that could be making money for them. And there are many models out there where some data is provided free, and then when you get a more detail or you start to zoom in on a particular area, then you start to pay. There are all sorts of different commercial models. And I think there are opportunities to open this up to the private sector, the commercial sector, to provide those opportunities. And that governments should put in place the regulations that will allow that to happen. The biggest problem is that it's a relatively unknown area. The seas and oceans are not widely understood yet. I talked about sea blindness, moving into an era of sea vision, and we're on that cusp. And so people are beginning to wake up to the opportunities. I think the biggest opportunities lie, as I said, in the complex sea basins and on the continental shelf, and going further out to sea as awareness grows and technology improves. So really, this is something to leave to the market to get on and make happen. And we're back in the age-old problem of who makes the first step, makes the initial investment, and to see the benefit. We're starting to see it.
We see that Baltics are, let's say, leading in this agenda. Would you agree?
Yeah, I've always thought the Northwest Europeans across the blue economy are very, very progressive. Countries such as Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark. If you want to see somebody with an ambition to build an autonomous ship, head to Finland or head to Norway. If you want to see really sophisticated vessel traffic services and coordinations of ports and harbours, then take a look at Rotterdam or head up to Hamburg. There's some very, very sophisticated, forward-thinking activity in that part of the world. It's very exciting.
Indeed. And a prerequisite for all of these technologies that we touched upon today is good connectivity. And that is not such a big issue, I would say, in short sea. But as we go deeper into the oceans, the importance and availability of good connectivity is becoming sort of an issue. So we also mentioned before low Earth orbit constellations, and could you maybe expand a little bit on that? What is the future of deep sea connectivity in terms of low Earth orbits?
Well, first of all, you're spot on. Connectivity is always an issue, and it's improving all the time. It's not as good as terrestrial broadband connectivity, but we're getting to a point where it's very, very usable, and with clever compression softwares and so on, and some thoughtful processes and procedures, you can make it happen. So there is that need to understand that if you want to get the cost effectiveness, if you want to get the improved operational efficiency, you need to pay for the connectivity. And that's the struggle that shipping has gone through over, say, the last 10 years. And I think we've gone over the crest of that particular hill, and everybody realizes that connectivity is worth paying for, and you get the benefits of it once you've paid for it. So that has started. Coming fast on the heels of that, as you say, is the low Earth orbit economy, the use of nanosats and small sats in an altitude above the Earth, roughly in the same level as the space station, which gives improved coverage. And also we're starting to see lots and lots of new sensors going up there. And there's a lot of interest in satellites that will provide connectivity from low Earth orbit. So the coverage will improve, the latency will reduce, will improve, and the cost will come down. And then there's lots and lots of ideas about extending terrestrial broadband networks from shore. So once you start to combine all of those, certainly in a complex sea basin, you should get very, very good connectivity. And that's the point at which the thing really kicks off. And I think this is people do not realize what the unintended consequences of that connectivity will be. It will go way beyond shipping. All sorts of different industries and opportunities will result from high-speed broadband connectivity in complex sea basins. Very exciting times.
Yes, indeed, very exciting times, especially if we can also extrapolate the notions from for example, industrial automation, and how this great connectivity and Ethernet-based networks basically change everything and catapulted into existence this Internet of Things concept, and where this whole thing is going on. And let's go back a little bit on the security side of things. I mean, we see that the connectivity is important, and that we have more and more ways to connect. But some of these technologies have some significant drawbacks in terms of security. Could you maybe comment on that?
Yeah, I can. It's again a very interesting issue, and it's a mindset thing, and I can be a bit firm on it, really. We all know that security around software and the use of computers is paramount. In all of our companies shoreside, everybody has processes and procedures that tell them how they should manage their computers, how they should manage their security, their cyber security. And it's no different at sea. It's absolutely no different at sea. So if you're exposed at sea, it's because you haven't put in place the processes and procedures to counter hackers and cybersecurity attacks at sea. It's as simple as that. What is the difference between somebody operating a computer system on a ship and somebody operating it shoreside? There is no difference in practical terms. The issue is that traditionally it's been very difficult to hack into ships at sea or infrastructure at sea. Now it's becoming easier because the connectivity is better. So it just means that the processes and procedures that we use shoreside should be used at sea. It's easy to say, but that's the fact. Yeah. And it's a mindset thing. There's lots of people out there who will try and sell maritime operators all sorts of clever things to counter the cybersecurity or to ensure their cybersecurity. But most of the time, it comes down to processes and procedures, training and education, and putting in place the process to ensure your cybersecurity. I'm sorry if that sounds a bit firm, but that's how I see it.
No, it does. I mean, we've seen in many of these attacks in history that humans are the weakest link in this cybersecurity domain, and it's definitely an interesting prospect to see how that will evolve, especially when this connectivity becomes bigger and bigger and better and better.
It's a balance of investment decision, isn't it? You can cut yourself off, don't pay for the connectivity, and your cybersecurity problem will go down, but then your cost effectiveness will reduce and the efficiency of your operation will reduce, and maybe you won't get the same level of opportunity that your competitor has got.
Yes, it's kind of an ostrich approach, but it's inevitable that this is the direction that the things are going, and definitely new market niches will be coming our way from the connectivity, from the cybersecurity, but also from e-navigation. This is maybe one of the last topics that I'd like to discuss for today. It's an integral part of this situational awareness and the connectivity and cybersecurity is this e-navigation term. Could you maybe explain us a bit what is e-navigation?
Well, e-navigation in very, very simplistic terms is the transition from using analog or paper charts and navigation processes to the world of sort of maritime Garmin, if you like. We're moving into the world of navigating on computers using digital systems. And the fundamental change has been the shift from a chart, information presented on a chart, to what's known as a vector database. The database is completely amorphous, and you can pull data out of it from wherever you need it to create a digital chart. So you can query data down through all sorts of layers in a very clever way. And that can be related to a global positioning system. And so you can have very, very accurate positioning, continuous positioning, and you can have very, very accurate projection, course projection, so where you are going to be. And that is a game changer in terms of how maritime navigation is done, shipping navigation in particular, but it's also a game changer for supply chains, because if those ships are connected, then the wider supply chain, the terrestrial supply chain, can understand where their ships are and therefore where their goods are that they're transferring or they're moving around on those ships. And that then improves the efficiency of the supply chain. So the whole global supply chain can be improved on the back of e-navigation. So e-navigation was, I use the example of unintended consequences. The unintended consequences of e-navigation are starting to emerge now, as numerous agents are using e-navigation, and associated with it is AIS. People are starting to track ships now who would never have known that they could do that in the past and would never have bothered to even try. That's the game changer. It really is the kernel of the change in the shipping industry.
What do you think how will the navigation will look in the future once we start integrating more and more? How do you see, for example, in a decade or 2 decades?
Oh, I think we'll have we'll have another couple of generations of e-navigation systems. At the moment, they are completely independent. I think they will become increasingly integrated into ship systems. They will underpin the move towards autonomous shipping, and I've got all sorts of views on what that means, but you will see much more autonomous shipping coming into the system, not necessarily completely unmanned, but moving down that route of autonomy. You will also see much better integration of movements in ports and harbours. You'll see far better integration of onward movement through rail and road and air. We'll see it's even possible that you could reduce the number of ships that you need if you are really efficient in how you operate them. That assumes, of course, that the amount of stuff we move around is reduced. You could see much better routing. The coordination between ship and shore or offshore infrastructure and shore will improve exponentially over the next 10 to 20 years. And we'll see a whole new generation of ship operators coming into the system. What I mean by ship operators is really the people who manage ship shoreside will be a very different type of expert than the ones we have now, as we learn how to operate these integrated solutions.
Yeah, jobs of the future and the skill sets will dramatically change along those lines as well.
Oh yes, and everybody thinks there'll be fewer jobs. I'm not so sure. I think there will be potentially more jobs, but they may be in different locations and very different to the ones that we know now.
Correct. We'll see what the future brings us. And for the end, maybe what book would you recommend, for example, for somebody who thinks about joining the Maritime and the Marine?
Oh dear, a book to read. Oh, there are so many. I would. It's not a book. I would say take a read of Ireland's Harnessing Our Ocean Wealth. There's a Blue Economy document. I also think that the EU's Blue Growth Strategy is a very good strategy. If you want to read some books about marine and maritime to get yourself inspired, you can go do no worse than reading some books about Shackleton. That's the sort of area I would go, but you'll then be going straight back to the world of analog navigation and real experts who are able to operate without connectivity.
Indeed, those are real experts. And where can people find more about you, Nick, and your company?
We have a website, nlaltd.co.uk. We have a flyer. You're more than welcome to contact me by email. Hopefully you'll make that available. And we are starting to make our way in this wonderful world of the blue economy, and very excited to be helping people.
Yes, very exciting future ahead of us. Nick, thank you very much for being on the show and for the insightful talk that we had.
It was my pleasure, Uri. Thank you very much indeed. I'm always happy to talk about the blue economy, as you can tell.
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot again, and talk to you soon, I hope.
Yeah, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
And that's it for today's episode. Thank you for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. For more information about Nick and his company, you will find in the show notes on autonomousshipshq.com/podcast, or simply go to nlaltd.com. If you like the show, please share it on the social media. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @autonomousships. And that's it. Until next time. Oi oi.